We're wrapping up day 5 at Colorado's preseason camp, and Brian, today was the focus on the defensive line. Chris Wilson talked to the media and had a couple of good one-liners in there for us.
He did, and Chris is always a funny guy. I like him. Really good coach, but really personable guy as well. And he likes this group, and he's definitely a one-liner type of guy. And he didn't use my favorite one today, but he's always good for a laugh or two.
He's trying to build up some depth in there. One of his one-liners last year was, "We're trying to build a Chinese army in terms of depth." They didn't have that last year. They didn't trust guys deep into their rotation there. This year, you start to wonder who's going to be in that rotation. There's a true freshman that keeps coming up, and I think Chris Wilson tried to pump the brakes on a little bit by using the analogy that for every rookie in the NFL you play, you're going to lose a game. So, not that Ryan Williams is going to be a starting defensive lineman, but I talked to Naeem Rodman. You talked to him as well. He's a guy that keeps being brought up time and time again.
Yeah, and at Pac-12 Media Day, I talked to Nate Lamon and Coach Durrell. I didn't even ask about Ryan Williams. They both brought him up, and in fact, Durrell was talking about Ryan Williams, about how impressive he is, and then Nate sits down and Durrell says, "Nate, what do you think of Ryan Williams?" And Nate just kind of smiled and said, "This dude's a beast, big and fast." And so there's a lot of upside. Who knows what that means for this year? But certainly, if you're a Buff fan, you got to like the future with a guy like that.
Sticking with those true freshmen again, I think you got to temper expectations in terms of how much they're going to play, but Tyus Martin had a really, really serious back injury.
Yeah.
I mean, he had to work his way back to start walking again. And a lot of guys, fortunately for him, he's a young guy, was able to bounce back from it. He's a massive human being. Again, I don't know how much you can play coming off a severe back injury a year before, but he sure looks the part out here.
Yeah, he does. And, they got some guys. I think Chris Wilson used the term when asked about the freshman. We hit the mark, meaning to me it means they got some guys in here. In recruiting, they got some guys that fit the profile of what they want. And not too long ago, CU under previous coaches, were bringing in guys that they were a little bit smaller that they wanted to beef up while they were here. Well, they're not having to do that. Now they're getting guys that they're already big, and now it's just kind of maybe reshaping what that body size is. And it looks like they've got that with guys like Ryan Williams and Tyus Martin.
Like I said, we both talked to Naeem Rodman. He told me, hey, flat out, my goal was to win a starting job, and there's still a lot of camp left, but just based on everything we heard this spring early on this camp, if you assumed Sami and Jordan are going to rotate in the interior there, I think Naeem Rodman would be the guy you pencil in there.
Yeah, I think so. And he had a great spring. And I asked Chris Wilson if Naeem has kind of taken off from that, and he said he really has. And Naeem said the same thing. And that he didn't play as well last year as he did the previous year, and he kind of had to adjust to kind of some new techniques under Coach Wilson last year. Didn't have that much time to really adjust to it with a shortened season last year. He's been really driven this offseason. I think he's going to be a key player for this defensive line.
Anything else stand out to you just about Chris Wilson's address to us?
No, the confidence of who he is. He's a coach that's been around for a long time. He's asked a lot about, and was asked again today about being back in the DC role, making that transition. He's like, I've been around for a long time. I've done this before, and he comments a lot about he's got veteran coaches around him that can really focus on their positions, and he trusts them to allow him to coach the defensive line. So he's a guy that's very confident in just who he is. He's just. He's a veteran coach, and he knows what he's doing. And just because he's in a DC role for the first time in several years doesn't mean there's a big adjustment period for him. He knows what he wants to do.
We both talked to a safety as well. I talked to Curtis Appleton, who was placed on scholarship at the spring showcase. Cool story. Comes out of Cherry Creek, and the big schools are telling him, hey, you're too small. He goes to a lower level school, and he's looking around and going, this is not the atmosphere I want to play college football at. Yeah. So he bets on himself, comes here, worked his way on to special teams. He's still going to be a special teams guy here. And he gets an interception against San Diego State last year. Yeah. Like I said, he gets placed on scholarship. Mm-hmm. And we talked about it the other day. You're maybe a little concerned about depth. He's a guy that might play quite a bit of football this year. It just kind of depends on how injuries shake out on the back end.
Yeah, I like the top three if they're healthy. What I assume are the top three with Mark Perry, Isaiah Lewis, and Chris Miller, if they're healthy, but we know Chris Miller has always struggled with that. But if there is injuries, no matter if it's Chris or Mark or Isaiah, a guy like Curtis Appleton is someone that I think you can plug in there and feel, pretty good about it. I think Curtis has probably got to get better than where he was last year in order to really feel comfortable with him being a full-time starter. But you feel good about him having to go onto the field and play a little bit. That's a guy that does have experience. He's got athleticism, and we saw it last year. You mentioned San Diego State. He can play.
And you talked to Isaiah Lewis, one of the surprise breakout guys from last year. Probably one of the most underrated players on this entire team. What was your takeaway from talking to him?
Yeah, and I mentioned to him, I was like, hey, I told him, I said, you were one of those guys going into last year. I was like, I don't know if Isaiah will, play much or anything. He goes, yeah, I know. I mean, it's just one of those things that we, as a society, I think we kind of want that instant gratification when guys come in. Mm-hmm. We've seen freshmen that come in and play really well, and so when freshmen and sophomores don't, play lights out, a lot of times people like to write them off, but there's a natural progression, and Isaiah went through that natural progression. He had to go through special teams, kind of get his feet wet, things like that, and that's what he and I talked about, was just he had to mature a little bit, and you go through that progression, and learning from other safeties, and all of a sudden last year it clicked, and he wasn't even a starter to start last year. I mean, it was Chris Miller, and then Miller gets hurt, and Isaiah comes in and plays really well. He's got a lot of confidence now, is becoming a leader in the back end, and if he plays like he did last year, and he stays healthy, they're going to be okay back there.
All right, that wraps up day 5. Carl Durrell is set to talk to the media again on Tuesday. We'll be back with more analysis then.